Greetings and blessings, you guys. It's your host, Marquita Brooks again, and I am excited to share more with you in this God Speaks series on marriage. Today, we're looking at the topic on marriage and kids. Very important topic because the Lord has a vision for marriage. He has a goal for marriage. And I've shared some things with you guys about his goals for marriage. But what you want to see here, let's go back to Malachi chapter 2. We see that the Lord himself is trying to produce godly offspring. That is one of the most important goals for marriage. So here in Malachi chapter 2, as the Lord, of course, is rebuking the priests, y'all will remember that. The Lord is rebuking those priests for breaking their covenant with their wives. And he says in verse 15, has not the one God made you? You belong to him in body and spirit. And what does the one God seek? Godly offspring. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful to the wife of your youth. Now, this is a very important place for us to start, because as we look at this, what we see is that the Lord is saying, I have given you the covenant of marriage, and I have allowed you two to become one, just as I am one, because the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit are one. He's saying, I've allowed you to become one, husband and wife, for various purposes, but specifically here he mentions the purpose of godly offspring. That is a plan of God from the beginning, that holy people would be a result of holy marriages, or what we often call holy matrimony. The result would be holy people, godly offspring, people who are like God. Like that's what he wants. He wants people who are like himself. And so your marriage then, the husband and wife coming together, the two becoming one flesh, has to then resemble the oneness we see with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That beautiful submission, surrender, cooperation that we see happening between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit is what the Lord wants to see between us in our marriages. He wants to see that in our marriages, that we are cooperating, working together, living together, loving each other, becoming even more and more like him and more like each other as we become single-minded in our focus. And this is a big key. So I'm going to tell you, to have healthy children, for your children to be healthy, you need to be consistent. So consistency is going to be one of the most important things to actually develop healthy children. For your children to be holy, for them to be godly, you need to have a covenant. Covenant produces godly children. And this is why the Lord is rebuking them for breaking covenant with their wives, because he knows that this is going to affect the godly character of their children, or actually cause them not to have godly character. Is essential, because the Lord knows what's going on. He knows exactly how this is going to play out. And so this is why he's dealing with it now. Children start out as seeds in the womb. A woman has an egg and it's fertilized by the sperm cell of the man. The two become one, and then that seed begins to grow into a human. The cells begin to multiply, replicate themselves, organs form, tissues form, all this forms. But it starts as a seed. And this is so important that we understand that and we think about that, because everything in that child's life starts as a seed. Everything starts small, everything starts as a seed. Everything that is sown eventually grows and grows and grows until finally it bears fruit. And this is what will happen. Your children are small seeds. They're a contribution from you and your spouse, and they will reveal and reflect back to you, back to both of you, aspects of your character, aspects of your genetic makeup and your background and experiences. They will reflect all of that to you. But they will, as they continue to grow, they'll reveal even more. That fruit of what you've sown into them is going to continue to show as they become preteens, teens, young adults, full-grown adults. You'll start to see the fruit of what you have sown into them. And this is a big deal. It's very important that we understand it, because when we get to this place of understanding what the fruit of our offspring is producing, the seeds that we have sown into our offspring, the fruit that then it produces, this reveals to us that we've got to be careful what we sow. We got to be careful how we rear our children, and the seeds that we sow into them are the seeds that we fail to sow into them. Because this is probably the most important thing you'll do in your whole life. Marriage and having children is probably the most important thing you'll do in your whole life, because you are directly responsible to and for other individuals. And there's no other relationships on earth that mirror these relationships. So as we look at this, as we continue to go forward, I started here. Remember, Malachi chapter 2, verse 15. God's vision for marriage is godly offspring. And we want to remember healthy children come from consistency and other things, but certainly consistency. And godly children come from covenant. And so we want to make sure that we look at all of these areas as we go forward. So let's start first with covenant. Let's start with covenant, and that we want to make sure we produce these godly offspring that the Lord is talking about. We want to make sure that we produce them and they come out of covenant. Now, there's two covenants that are going to be very important here, but there's one other one that you're going to see that will be additionally important, one that we often don't talk about. So first and foremost, of course, you want to be in a covenant love relationship with the Lord himself. You and your spouse. Because remember, it is the Lord who takes two people and makes them one. And so in order for the two of you to become one, that miracle that he does in marriage, you both got to be in covenant with him. And I'm not talking about, we talked about this before, especially in vows, when we look at on marriage and vows. I'm not talking about a loose relationship. I'm not talking about a casual relationship with God. I'm not talking about a relationship that's transactional, where, if you do something for you, then you do something back for him. I'm talking about a covenant, meaning you have committed to be in relationship with God, and you have accepted the terms of his covenant, which is the entire Bible. You have asked him to teach you to live by the terms of the covenant in the Bible. So you're reading the Bible regularly. You have sought him to just place more and more and more of his Holy Spirit within you, so you become more and more like him. And your spouse is doing the same thing. So as we continue in that covenant relationship with God, we first are being transformed. First, he's transforming us. And it's a continual transformation. We're continually being transformed by the renewing of our minds, so we will know what he wants, and we will agree that what God wants is good, satisfying, and able to succeed. That is Romans 12, verse 2. Now, verse 1 tells us to present ourselves as living sacrifices, holy, acceptable unto the Lord. This is the logical temple worship for us, or your reasonable service. And to be not conformed to the standards of this present age, but to continually be transformed by the renewing of our minds. It takes you right into verse 2. The reason that's important is because this covenant with the Lord, of course, he sealed it in blood by the sacrifice of his own son on the cross. But we too, as members of our covenant with God, have to also be willing to sacrifice. Covenant requires sacrifice, because this beautiful covenant love relationship is one, a covenant is one made in blood. So we've got to be willing to sacrifice in our relationship with the Lord, that we can receive more of him and be a blessing to him, just as he has sacrificed for us, so that he can be a blessing to us and even to address the areas where we fall short. We've got to be willing to do that in our covenant relationship with our spouses. Each one sacrificing for each other. We talked about that before. But here is another covenant relationship. And so there's a third covenant relationship. There's the covenant between parent and child. And that is a covenant relationship, and it is a blood covenant. And this is important that we understand that, because when the egg, the ovum, and the sperm cell come together, and those cells take on a new life and they start to multiply and replicate, one of the first things they create is blood. So not only did the man shed blood when he was circumcised, not only did the woman shed blood when she first had sexual intercourse, not only do the two pass bodily fluids back and forth to each other during intercourse, but in creating a human, both contribute their DNA, their blood, to the formation of that child. In which case, both parents automatically have a blood covenant with their child. This is important that we get that, because that's not a way that we often think about our relationship with our children, as having a blood covenant with them. and in the blood covenant relationship that we have with our children. So you, the parent, them, the child, you are the leader of that relationship, meaning you set the tone and you are training your covenant partner, who is your child. You will get out of your covenant relationship with your child what you put into it. What you sow into your child, you will reap back from your child in your continuing relationship with them. Or the fact that sometimes parental and child relationships are discontinued and that somebody cuts the other one off. See, that's a terrible, terrible result of previously broken covenant, meaning that covenant had been broken long before that. And eventually the relationships become so toxic and so abusive to each other, so harmful to each other, so disappointing to each other, that one or both parties decided to not interact anymore. And that is the sad, sad thing, because God gives us parents for the express purpose of revealing himself to us. Our parents are the first experience that we have with God. And if you think back to your relationship with your parents, you'll realize that that was true for you growing up. And then you'll see very clearly how true that is for your own children. They learn who God is by interacting with you at the very beginning of their lives. So when we look at a child's life and a child's growth and development, I actually was a youth development director for many, many years, in which case, different developmental stages and levels for children is something that I'm very well versed in. When you look at a child's development and growth, in the womb, you look at their growth, after being born, from babies up to adolescence and all of that, what you're going to see is that a child's brain is really, it's moldable. And I don't just mean physically, though. When they're first born, literally their brains are moldable. They have that soft spot on their head where the skulls are still growing in. But I mean in the metaphoric sense, and that they have not created, the neural pathways that we have as full-grown adults, which means that every experience that they have, every interaction they have, causes them to form a neural pathway in their brain, which is going to contribute to their worldview, their view of themselves, and their view of other people around them for the rest of their lives. And this is a big responsibility, because you're starting pretty much with just clay. Children have, when they're first born, they have very little influences. Now, of course, we know this to be true, that generational blessings take effect even before birth. Generational curses can start to take effect even before birth. The emotions of the mother when she's carrying the child, the things that she eats, the things that she drinks, the places that she goes, the sounds that she's around, because the child can feel those vibrations and experience those sounds even in the womb. Those things actually do affect the child in the womb. That's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. But they are having symbiotic experiences, meaning they are living through the mother at the time. So when they are born, it goes to a whole nother level. Now they have their own sight. They have their own hearing. They have their own sense of taste. They have their own sense of touch. And while they can feel things in the womb is designed to be a protective place. So there are, there have to be some seriously traumatic things to happen outside of the womb in order to injure a baby in the womb. Like there has to be some serious pressure, serious attack, serious, force applied to injure the baby in the womb, because the womb is designed to be a protective place, so that the child is able to grow and be healthy in safe ways. But once they are born, they're completely vulnerable. That protective surrounding of the womb is now gone, because you got the mother's belly, you got the uterus itself, you got the amniotic fluid. So you get 3 layers of protection when the baby's in the womb. But once they are born, they are now exposed to everything in the world, not just in the natural sense, but even in the spiritual sense. Now, of course, like I said, the enemy does try to start sometimes in the womb, but most of that is about attacking the mother, the host. She's holding the baby. But after the baby is born, the enemy goes right after babies. The enemy will go right after babies, little children. He's bombarding them all the time. I've seen demons over cribs and over bassinets because they're starting that early. The reality is the Lord has commanded us to start that earlier, even earlier. To be praying for our children before they even conceive, to pray for them after they're conceived and in the womb, to pray for them after they're born, and all the time. We should not just be praying for them, but we should be bringing positive influences, godly influences into their lives. Because remember what I said, they start out where their brains are completely moldable. It is the experiences that they have that cause them to create neural pathways. And from those neural pathways, they create other different synapses and other things in the brain that store information and determine how they will see the world. So babies who are exposed to pain, abuse, things like that early on, that their neural pathways are set to teach them that that is what the world is. It's pain, disappointment, hurt, abuse. That's what life is. It affects the way they see themselves. It affects the way they see other people. The world then becomes something that's out to get them. God even becomes someone who's out to get them, because this has now been their earliest experience. Very important that you get that. When babies are exposed to compassion, nurturing, protection, provision, they receive the things that they need. And this is true for babies, small children, adolescents. Like, it continues to be true. But especially the earlier there are, which is why people focus so much on early development for children, because the brains are forming at that time. And they're like sponges. They're picking up everything. They're learning language and symbols. They're learning what represents what does what, the consequences of this, the way this interacts with that. They're learning everything. But the point that I'm making here is that when godly influences come, healthy influences come, when they're nurtured, when they're taught and trained, when they're guided, when they're protected, when they have positive influences, they create neural pathways in their brain that the world is a safe place, that they can take risks, that they can grow in this world, they can be successful in this world, that God is good, that people are generally good. Like, these are things that are happening in their brain, and everything else that happens will then actually be connected to those original neural pathways. Meaning, if they experience the abuse, the neglect, the trauma, those type of things, then everything else that happens is going to be attached to that trauma. They will measure everything else based off of that trauma. Is it the same or is it different? But when they experience healthy things, holy things, godly things, when they believe that they are good and other people are good and God is good and the world can be a good and safe place, then they attach this new information that they get as they grow to that idea of good, of safety. And it causes them to be more confident. It causes them to be more likely to take risks. It causes them to be more likely to be successful. All of these things. And God knows that. The Lord knows that. This is why he tries to get a hold of us before we become parents. He wants us to be saved. He wants us to seek him. He wants us to be in covenant with him before we bring children into the world. That is the best case scenario. And it's important. I'm going to tell you why. Because if the husband is in covenant with the Lord, and the wife is in covenant with the Lord, and then they talk about rearing children and what they believe and how they want to do it, then they're able to come together, produce an offspring that comes into the world through vessels that already are filled with the Holy Spirit. Children, babies can be born filled with the Holy Spirit. I've seen it. Absolutely, even in my own children. And this is so important, because when they start out with the Holy Spirit, because literally they're connected with God from conception, because the parents are in relationship with God and the parents are filled with the Holy Spirit, they start out with so many advantages when it comes to being close to God, understanding God, loving God, having a relationship with God. They're starting from a good foundation. So as those neural pathways are forming in their brain, they already got the Holy Spirit within them. As the neural pathways are forming in their brain, they're forming in such a way that they will have a biblical and godly worldview. Because not only have their parents actually started them with this relationship with the Holy Spirit, but they've also been surrounded now in an environment in their home that is set up in accordance with godly principles. When that happens, again, they have a much greater advantage over other youth around them, who then have to kind of find God and figure out faith and life in a whole different scenario, in another different environment. so they can start out operating in biblical principles. They can start out understanding what it takes to be blessed by the Lord, to do what he says, to obey his commandments. They're starting out doing it. And this is what the Lord wants us to do. Like he tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 6, he gives us this all of these prescriptions for how we're supposed to be rearing our children and talking to them about the Lord. And I'm going to take you there now because there's a couple of things that I want to point out, especially from that biblical mindset. We're looking at a biblical worldview. The Lord tells them very clearly in verse 6, these words, which I'm ordering you today, to be in your heart. And in verse 7, it says, and you're to teach them carefully to your children. That means being intentional and to teach them as God has taught you. Meaning you don't change it up. You don't add anything, you don't take anything away. You are to talk about them when you sit at home, when you're traveling on the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And this, what that speaks of, is training our children in godliness through relationship. So certainly we want to have family devotions where we are reading the Bible together. We're talking about what we're reading in the Bible. Absolutely. We want to answer their questions about faith. We want to talk to them about God. But this, when we're just reading out of Deuteronomy chapter 6, and I read verses 6 and 7, that's going to let us know that God is saying that the way we interact with them should reveal God. Everything we're doing, we're driving them to school, we're picking them up from school. A lot of kids start at school today. Where I live, they start at school today. All of that, God should be in the midst of that. And we shouldn't be having to force God into the conversation, but we should be relating to them in such a way that we're helping them to create that biblical worldview, where they will see the world through the Bible, through biblical principles. They will see God as loving and benevolent and compassionate and all wise and all knowing and always there. And that they would begin to start to see these things. So again, you're affecting not just their spirituality, not just their emotional stability, which you are. Certainly is much more emotionally healthy to raise a child up in faith. Actually says children who are raised up in faith are more resilient than children who are not. Very important. And these are studies, these secular studies. Children who are raised up in faith environments are much more resilient than children who are not. So continuing on with that, the point is that you're not just making them emotionally healthy and resilient, but you are also affecting the way their brains process information. You are now giving them a standard, the Bible, God's ways, by which to measure everything else in the world. Because those formative years create the standard in our brain. And everything else is then measured and compared to what we learned in the formative years. And so it's very important that God is right there at the foundation. Now, remember what I said. You want to start with covenant with God, covenant with your spouse. I'm giving y'all best case scenarios. Later on, I'm going to talk to you about what to do when that's just not your life. It's not the best case scenario. We're going to talk about that because that's most of our lives. You got to do some other things. We got to talk about what that looks like because the Bible does help us. But what I would encourage you to see, especially if you're a young person, maybe you're a young couple, you want to make sure that you have decided to follow the Lord. You have decided to read his word, apply it to your life. And as a couple, you have decided what that means for your family and your household. So considering that y'all have decided to follow God, you're in covenant with God, and you're in covenant with each other, you decided to remain in covenant with each other, no matter how hard it gets. We talk about that in vows. That divorce is not a word you use, it's a bad word. It's the D word, it's the one you don't even say, right? You made some decisions that you are going to honor both covenants, covenant with God and covenant with each other. In this now covenant relationship with your child, you want to make sure before they're even brought into the family that you two, the husband and wife, are in agreement as to what your home environment will be like and how you will rear your children. And this is very, very important that we get that, because when we can agree as husband and wife before the children come, you will find that, remember the first thing I actually told you, is to have healthy children in consistency. When you're in covenant with God, covenant with each other, and covenant connotes agreement. How can two walk together unless they be agreed? So you're in agreement because you're in covenant, in agreement, to be married. But there's so many other things you got to be in agreement about. When it comes to your child, you got to be in agreement about so many other things. You got to be in agreement about, how you want to rear them. How do you want to train them up? You got to be in agreement about, how you will guide them, how you will instruct them, how you will educate them, homeschooling, public school, private school. Like there's lots of different options. How you will deal with possessions and things like that. Some parents want their kids to have all the best of everything, and some parents don't want to spoil them, so they want to make sure that they have good things, but not too much, so they learn the value of a dollar. See, y'all have to agree on those things. You have to agree about that. You got to agree on how you're going to discipline them. Because for parents to disagree about that is a very big deal in the household. It's a very big deal in the household. Because what will happen is if you're in a disagreement about discipline, you will start to undermine each other in the child's eyes. And I'm going to tell you right now, as we look at consistency, remember I told you, consistency helps to create healthy children. Consistency will make them healthy. I'm talking mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, and even physically healthy. Consistency makes them healthy, okay? If one of you says, oh, this is okay if you do that, then the other one says, no, it's not okay, and it actually incurs discipline, the two of you are divided on that issue, and the child is confused. When you confuse a child, they go back to what's in here, and then they decide how they're going to proceed. Now, there's some scriptures that tell us some very, very important things. I want to take you to Proverbs Chapter 22. There's a couple of things in Proverbs Chapter 22 that I want you to know. When we're talking about rearing children, and particularly discipline, which is something that often divides parents, especially in this society. Years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, when the man was the head of the household, wives tended to submit to the way the husband believed that the child should be disciplined. Not always, but most of the time they did. Now, fast forward 2021, husbands and wives often have very different ideas about how to discipline children. And it's not just a man versus a woman thing, but oftentimes there's one of them. It can be either the man or the woman that's a much more strict disciplinarian. And then there's the other that's a little more laissez-faire as a leader, kind of let them, grow and do their own thing, discover their own way. And that, the fact that there is disagreement there, that is not going to work in actually interacting with the child. There has to be a coming together, a meeting of minds, a choosing of a path, and then presenting that to the child every time you're with the child, and not just when you talk to them, but in your body language, in every interaction, and consistently doing what you said you're going to do, both parties being as one and raising the child so that the child learns what to do, what's good, what's healthy, what not to do, what's bad, what's unhealthy. And when I say good, I'm talking about good as regard to God's standards. And when I say bad, I mean in accordance with God's standards. So they learn to be holy and healthy with that consistent direction and with the consistent discipline. When you give consistent direction and consistent discipline, they learn the difference between right and wrong. And that standard that you create in your household will carry them even when they go out into the world and people have all other different types of standards. They'll have different standards in school. They'll have different standards as they grow up and interact in social groups. They'll have different standards in their workplace when they become adults or young adults. They'll have different standards at their university. But when you as parents have been in agreement when they were young in their formative years and stayed consistent as they grew older, we'll talk about those developmental stages in a minute. As you stay consistent with your standard and the way you apply those moral standards and those rules and regulations and then the way you do things in your home, and you apply it to your child and you train it to them and you enforce it through discipline and through reward, when you do that, they have a very clear moral compass and they can go into any type of scenario, good, bad, healthy, unhealthy, and they can make firm and effective and godly decisions for themselves. They will be decisive, and those decisions will actually be good decisions. And we want to create those type of people. And so let's look at Proverbs Chapter 22. I want to read verse 6 in your hearing, and I'm going to read it in both the NIV and in the Complete Jewish because they read differently. It says, in the NIV, it says, start children off on the way they should go. And even when they are old, they will not turn from it. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That beginning, the way you start with a kid, being consistent with the moral standard, being in agreement with each other, displaying that agreement before the child, right? And then helping them to be consistent with that, being consistent with your discipline, your standard, all of that. And they will then grow up, even if they go through a phase, so they got some bad friends, that happens, and they get off track. It's in there. Remember, I told you guys at the beginning, you have helped to set neural pathways in their brain. And eventually they will come back to it, because the truth of the matter is everything that happens in their life is going back to the standard that you originally set, because the neural pathways are set. All other new information is now being judged by that original information. This is so key. This is what we want to do in our children. We want to start it out that way so that they continue to go in that healthy and holy way. But let's read Proverbs Chapter 22, verse 6 in the Complete Jewish. It says, train a child in the way he should go, and even when old, he will not swerve from it. And when you read commentary on this verse, a lot of commentaries say, not just in God's way, but in the child's way. Train the child in the way the child should go, meaning being specific to your child. Rearing your child in a way that's specific to who that little human is. Remember what I said. You're in covenant with God. You're in covenant with your spouse. You're also in covenant with your child. Every child you have, you're in covenant with it. You're in a blood covenant with that child. I don't care if you're not even a believer. Even people in the world are in blood covenants with their children. They often break those covenants, but they are in those covenants just by nature of producing a child, carrying a child, birthing a child. Whether you're the father or the mother, that makes you, it puts you in a blood covenant with that child. And that child is another human being with their own soul, with their own identity, with their own purpose, not your purpose, not your identity, which means we got to release to God all that stuff we didn't get to do, so we don't live vicariously through our children, because then we're not training him in the way he each should go, he or she should go, which is what the scriptures tell us. Train a child in the way that he should go. Meaning, what is the way for that child? Only way you're going to know is you're going to have to pray. Pray and watch. Watch and pray. And it's so interesting because the Lord actually says that to his disciples when they're in the Garden of Gethsemane. Stay alert, so you watch and pray. And so we always got to watch and pray. We're looking for the enemies, prowling like a lion, roaring and seeking whom he can devour. We're looking for dangers in the world, because the world can be a dangerous place, especially for little children. As it's not really designed for little children. So we got to protect them in lots of different scenarios. But we're watching and praying about the things around, but we've also got to watch the child, because the child will start to show you who they are. And we've got to pray, because God will tell you before the child will. Sometimes you got to wait for a child to get some age before you really start to see who they really are. Like those little personalities will come out immediately. Even in infancy, you'll start to see their little personalities. But other details about who they really are, their identity, it'll take years before those things start to manifest and you really understand it, unless you're praying. If you're praying, God will then help you discern what you're seeing. And he will show you how you should raise each individual child. Now, if you've got like 5 kids, you don't want to have different standards for all the kids. I'm not talking about changing your standard. I'm talking about making sure that your consistent standard that the two of you have agreed on in all different types of areas of life, you apply it specifically to each child. And that's going to be very, very important. Like for a child who has a lot of intellectual ability with regard to the type of intellect that is measured in the traditional school system, because there's lots of different intellects, lots of different types of intelligences, and all of our kids are intelligent. But I mean, people have the book smarts. That child, you're going to put them in accelerated classes and you're going to expect them to get all A's. But when you have a child who has more physical intelligence, they're more active. They're like the kinesthetic learner who's learning from activity and movement. They're physical, they're the athlete, but they may not have the book smarts. And some kids have both of those and they're missing something else. They may be social smarts, the social intelligence. But my point is, you're learning who that child is. But the child that doesn't have the book smarts, that kid, you're not going to put them in the accelerated class and expect them to get all A's like their older brother or sister, because they're different kids. But you're still holding them to a high academic standard. You're holding all of them to a high academic standard. And even a kid who is highly intelligent and kind of shies away from sports, you want them to learn to be social. So you're going to maybe put them in social environments, put them in activities, but you're not going to expect them to flourish like the child who is more active, more social. You understand what I mean? You make them all well-rounded. You make sure all of them are growing and learning, and you set a standard for all of them. But you deal with each one according to who they are as people. And this is so important. A lot of times we don't see our children as people. They're our children, but we don't see them as individuals. And we have to. You have to see your kids as individuals. You got to watch them to learn who they are. And you got to listen to God for him to tell you things about your children that it will take you years to learn. And so do that. Pay attention, watch, and pray so that you can train each child in the way he or she should go, so that when they're older, they will not depart from it. And so they've all got the standard. They all know what God expects from them. They all know what you expect from them. Like, they all get that piece. They all get that piece. But they all know that you have seen them individually, because he is El Rohi, the God who sees me. You have to be the parent who sees each one of your kids. See, if they're all just lumped in together and you don't make any concessions for individuality and individual giftings and individual challenges and things like that, or gender and age, and you don't make any distinction between any of these things, they don't learn that God is the God who sees them. They think that they're always lumped in with everybody and they're not an individual, and they will lose their individual identity. And you don't want any of your children to do that, no matter who they are, no matter how many you have. And I'm going to tell you, if you have one child and if you have many children, that's going to be, those two extremes is where you're most likely to miss it. When you've got 3 kids, 2 kids, 4 kids, like kind of in the middle there, you're going to probably deal with them as individuals. But when you only have the one child, all of your hopes go into that one child. So it's a lot of pressure for the one child, because you need that child to be the academic, the athlete. You need them to be the social butterfly. You need them to have grandbabies for you, have a happy marriage. Like, there's only one of them. You need them to live close so they can take care of you. You grow old. Like, everything goes into the one child, which can make it challenging for you to deal with that one child or that one person, because they will continue to grow as an individual, because you only have one of them. So every hope, every desire you have is now on that one child. You got to be careful of it. Be very, very careful of that, not to rob them of their individuality because you only have one kid. Same thing is true when you have multiple kids. You got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 kids. Having an individual personal relationship with each one and dealing with each one on an individual level can become more challenging. You got to plan for that, because you cannot lose that just because you choose to have more kids. You got to keep that. You got to make sure that the older ones don't lose their identity because you're making them raise the younger ones because you have so many kids. Like, you got to keep these things in mind. You got to keep Proverbs 22, verse 6 in mind, that you have to train each child in the way that he should go, or she, so that when they're older, they will not depart from it. And nobody gets lost in the shuffle. And this is very important. And if you're a single parent, it can be a challenge, even just 2 kids, because you're working and you're rearing them at the same time. And it can be a challenge to really treat each child, to train each child in the way that they should go, because you kind of need to put some stuff in place to make sure that it happens, because you don't have as much time. And so it's very important that we keep these things in mind so God can help us to do this, because there's lots of different scenarios where this becomes really hard. It becomes very, very hard. It becomes hard not to compare kids. When one excels in certain areas, it becomes hard not to tell the other one they should be like this child. But never do that. Never, ever tell your kids they should be like the other child. Never say, why can't you be more like your sister? I wish you were more like your brother. Never, ever do that to your kids, because it destroys their individual identity. And it can also put enmity between the brethren. You want your kids to be family to you and family to each other, because there's a time when you're not going to be there and they're going to need each other. But if they are bitter and resentful because mom always liked you more, they always thought that you were the good one and I would be this one, you never want to sow that into your kids. The world will do enough of that. When they come home, they need to come home to a safe place. Each individual child needs to come back home to your home to a safe place. and know that they are seen individually, they are loved, and that they're being addressed as who they are and for who they are, not as another child. And that you're not throwing your own personal expectations on them and the things you didn't get to do, like living vicariously through them. You're not throwing that on them. Instead, you have sought God about them as an individual, and you are really trying to train them up to be the best person that each one of them can be. Very important. Now, let's stay in Proverbs chapter 22, and I'm going to read verse 15 to you. And this is what it says in the Complete Jewish. Doing wrong is firmly tied in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away from him. And this is very, very important in scripture because it lets us know that discipline is absolutely necessary, and it's necessary at a young age. Most people are completely against discipline, particularly physical discipline. Like they do things like timeouts, and try to do, little consequences, take this toy away, things like that. But I'm going to tell you right now, I need y'all to really hear me, understand it. I'm talking to you guys about what the Bible says. I'm talking to you guys about what God is speaking, okay? Little children do not relate consequences to their behavior unless you give them consequences that they care about. And little children do not care most of the time about being sat in a corner, because they're going to get about and they're going to do what they want to do after that. Most of the time, little children do not care if you take something away just for a moment and then you give it back, especially if you always do that because they know you're going to give it back. Oh, yeah, you can take it away and give it back. Doesn't matter to them. I'm going to tell you what is an immediate trigger that this is bad, it is unacceptable, and it will cause me pain in my life, is when you inflict pain upon them, which is why the Proverbs is not the only place. The Proverbs talks about the rod of discipline or the rod of correction, and it is not a metaphor for a rod. It is a real rod, like a stick. You actually see it in other areas of Proverbs where it says, beat your son with a stick and you will save his life. And that's when people go, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's the scripture that they get out from. It literally says, if you hit him with a stick, you save his life. and this is important because they're talking about his life, meaning the natural life on earth, and that he will learn to make good choices, but also his spiritual life, and that you will save him from hell. You'll save him from the grave, the place of the dead apart from God. And so let's talk about discipline. Let's talk about discipline, a godly way of disciplining. And remember, I told you I have a background in youth development. I'm also an apostle and a prophet and a minister and a mom and a grandma. And so these are conversations that I've had with Lord. I've certainly searched the scriptures. I've learned quite a few things in my vocational background. And so I'm going to tell you what is tested and tried and proves to be reliable and effective. With all of this information all tied in together. When you're dealing with small children, so we're talking about those terrible twos. My daughter, Samaria, she actually had terrible one. She, as soon as she could walk, she was gone everywhere. As soon as she could get those little feet on the ground. And she was trying before she could walk to get to the ground. She used to throw herself all the stuff just so she could get down there because she was trying to move and walk and run before she even could. Like, I remember going, this is terrible twos, but she's one. She's not even close to two. She's like 1.5. What is happening? And she was everywhere. She's all over the place. And she knew what was going on at 6 months old. She knew when I was telling her not to do something, and she knew that if she wanted to do it, that she would be defying me, like at 6 months old. And I was like, this thing is 6 months old. And she is looking me in my face when I said no. And then she's still touching it, knowing that I don't want to touch it. And we had eye contact, we locked eyes. Like she knew that I said no. She knew I didn't want to do it, but she still was going to do it. Like it's so funny because they're really little and they're starting to really think for themselves. You're thinking that this is not going to happen until much later, but it happens very, very early on when they start to think for themselves. They decide what they want, what they don't want, when they want it. This is very early on. I'm talking 1, I'm talking 2, I'm talking 3. Very early on, they're very intelligent. They're watching everything. They're picking up everything. Even before they can articulate it, they're having thoughts. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because very early on, you want to start to associate consequences with negative, bad, unhealthy behavior. So if they're going to do something that will hurt themselves or others, you got to associate a consequence with that. If they are breaking a standard that you have set, because remember, you represent God. So right now, the things you tell them to do are not going to be like real big moral issues since they're one. They don't have a lot of moral issues at 1 year old. But they do know when you say yes and when you say no, no. They know those two things. They know that. They know that at that point. So they're walking around and they're talking a little bit, which happens at different stages for different babies. Like I told you, my daughter was just fast and just. My son was too, but he was a lot calmer and liked to kind of play in his own little space. But my daughter wanted to go everywhere, just run, take off. And so it was important that I set boundaries for her. Yes, no, yes, no. And you got to remember that you want to keep them safe, but you're also trying to make sure that you're building some godly habits and that you are being consistent. So you remember, we want to make them godly through covenant, and we want to help them to be consistent by us demonstrating consistency. This is very, very important. So when it comes to the godly covenant, remember I said they don't have a whole lot of moral dilemmas at the toddler stage. It's not a lot of moral dilemmas. Infants, honestly, you just got to take care of an infant. Infants are never bad. An infant is a baby. If they're crying, if they're annoying you, because that's all an infant can do is annoy you. They can't really hurt you. If they're annoying you, it's because they need something they can't communicate. So if you get frustrated, you got to pass them off to somebody else. That's why you need a spouse, or your parents around, your siblings, somebody, so that you can calm down, get yourself together, because you may be really tired, you may be really frustrated, but the baby's trying to communicate something they can't communicate. They don't have the ability to communicate yet, so you got to be gracious. When they become toddlers, they can talk a little, they're walking a little, they can communicate, but you got to remember they can't articulate everything. They can understand a lot more than they can say, because they're picking up all types of stuff, and they have been for 1.5 years, 2 years, and 3 years. They've been picking up stuff. So what you got to do is remember that you are representing God to them. So make sure your yes is yes and your no is no. Start it early, because you're building security, which is essential for children. Children have to feel secure. When children don't feel secure in their environment, they become insecure people. So you want to build security so that they're safe. You're keeping them safe. You're the protector. You're in charge. They're not in charge. It actually gives them a sense of security to know that you're in charge, that you're making the decisions. You're the big, tall, smart person, and you're in charge, and you're making decisions. You got to be that person. You certainly cannot be a friend to your little kid, and you cannot negotiate with a little child. When you negotiate with a little child, you are telling them that they are your peer and they are on your level. And you are losing authority, because at some point they're going to think they can negotiate with God. When he makes a very clear commandment, they're going to think that it doesn't apply to them, and they don't have to live by the commandment that the Lord wrote in the Bible and continues to enforce throughout life through the laws of the universe. See, you want to be careful what you're teaching them. So you've got to provide the security. You've got to make sure all their needs are met. We're talking about toddlers now. And you've got to make sure that you are consistent. Your yes is yes and your no is no. And you're going to say a lot of no's because you got to keep them protected, but make sure you also say a lot of yeses. Bless them. Do things you know they love, things they like. Find out what they like. Spend time with them. Say yes a lot, because you're going to have to say no a lot. No is going to be like the word. It's so funny. My daughter had a t-shirt that I bought her, and it said on the t-shirt, my name is No, but Nana calls me Precious. And that's because my mother, her grandmother, definitely called her Precious as a baby. But all I was saying was no, don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't go there. It was always no. And it was the funniest little shirt. I didn't actually still have that shirt, because it was so appropriate for our relationship. Because like I said, she would just run all over the place. I was like, no, stop, no. But my mom would call her Precious. So what you've got to remember to do then is to decide what standards are important. They need to explore and grow at that age. They need to explore. They need to grow. You've got to provide an environment where they can do it safely. They want to do things. They want to go places. They want to experience things. They're going to put stuff in their mouths because remember, they got five senses and they're fully aware of it. They want to hear. They want to see. They want to touch. They also want to taste. They're like, whoa, wait a minute. This is cool. I want to taste this. And they can already smell stuff. So smell is going to just come with it. So smell it, but I want to taste it. Everything they shouldn't, everything around them shouldn't be tasted. But you got to remember they're going to put stuff in their mouths. So that environment that you create for them to freely discover and grow and go is going to have to include them being able to put that stuff in their mouths. Just remember that because that they're using all five senses to gain information. Then you don't have to say no a whole bunch of times because you put an environment in place where all their senses are stimulated, but they're safe as they discover and explore. When they're in an environment where there is something that they should not touch or something that they should not do, you be sure to tell them no. Be very clear, be very distinct, no. And then let them know the consequence. Hot, like, this is the natural consequence. Hot, like I'm talking about the stove. No, hot. Or the street, no, danger. Like, be very clear of that it's off limits and what the consequence is. The way you enforce is that you have to enforce it with discipline. You have to absolutely enforce it with discipline. And it has to be physical discipline. You cannot put a child in a timeout for running in the street because they're just going to wait till the timeout is over and you're not going to tension them on running the street again. Because that was a game and it's funny. No, there has to be physical discipline. But remember, they are teeny people. It should not damage them. It should just let them know that there is a physical consequence. Because if they touch the stove, they are going to burn themselves. There's a physical consequence of that. If they run in the street, they could be hit by a car. There is a physical consequence of that. So you want to teach them there's a physical consequence of these certain actions. And what I did with my children with toddlers is whatever part of the body that they use to do what I told them not to do, I will pop that part of the body. And it depends on how many times you did it wrong, is how many pops you got. So if you try to touch the stove the first time, and I said, no, you got one pop on the hand. If you ran into a room that I told you not to go into, the first time you did it, you got one pop on the leg. If you ran into that room again, you get two pops on the leg. If you touch the stove again, you get two pops on the hand. And these, again, are not to damage them. You're not trying to harm them. You're trying to associate a physical consequence of pain with the action because you need them to become self-disciplined people. Children who are not disciplined become undisciplined adults. Adults who expect everything, who are entitled. And I'm telling y'all, what we're dealing with right now, it talks about these young people who just have all this entitlement. It's because parents stopped disciplining children. They started trying to reason with children. You can't reason with a child. They're still learning. You're teaching them how they should think. You can't reason with a person who's learning to think. It's illogical. But that's what parents started doing. Why? Because they felt guilty in disciplining their children. But the Bible tells us we have to discipline them. The verse that I just read to you, Proverbs 22, verse 15 tells us that they are born with foolishness, folly in their hearts, which means if you leave a child to themselves, they're going to do the wrong thing because they don't know better yet. You have to teach them. It's not wickedness. It's foolishness. I don't have the wisdom to know that a stove is going to burn me. I don't have the wisdom to know that a car can kill me. I don't have the wisdom yet. So I will operate in foolishness and folly. You can drive the foolishness out of me by disciplining me. Now, people have different ways of discipline. Like I said, I like to pop with my hand because one, it lets them know that I'm going to immediately discipline them. So I don't got to go get something like a belt or a stick or a switch or something. I don't have to go get anything. My hand is right there. So if you do it, I got my hand, I'm going to pop it right now. And immediately, discipline for little children. I'm talking toddlers. It has to be immediate. It has to be immediate. You cannot have them wait till you get home and wait till you get away from the people in the public. You got to stop caring about what other people think, and you got to deal with it right then. It's essential because they're not going to remember what happened. And now they just feel like you're just popping them for no reason. Like, what just happened? I didn't do anything. It loses its power completely. You also should never discipline a child when you're angry. And this goes for, I don't care how old they are. If you're angry, remove yourself from the situation. Then you have to come back and deal with it later. But for a toddler, it's too late to discipline. Hopefully somebody else did it, or you just have to wait till the next time because you cannot do it in anger because that's not what this is about. Discipline is an act of love. Please remember that. Disciplining a child is an act of love. You're disciplining them to save them from hell and death. That's why you're disciplining them. That's the goal. Not because you're frustrated, not because you're embarrassed. That's not why you discipline a child. Very important that we get that. So, like I said, I choose to use my hand. My hand is right there and I can be immediate in my response. However, other people like to use other things. Now, the second reason I use my hand, I remember I told you there were two reasons. One is because it's immediate. The second one is because I can feel it. My hand hurts when I pop you, just like it hurts your leg or your hand. So I can feel what that feels like. So I know that I don't go overboard. Oftentimes, I think when people use other things to pop their children, they don't know the effect it's having on the child because they can't feel it. They're using an inanimate object. Now, of course, the Bible is telling you to use a rod, which people often did in Bible days. And if you believe a switch or something like that, I know a friend of mine who used to use a spoon, and she would carry that spoon with her because she said that her hands were for the purpose of nurturing her kids, and she didn't want to use her hands. So they knew if she took out that spoon that she was about to discipline them because she had given them a clear standard, and then they had broken the standard. See, very important. The standard must be set. When they disobey, when they break the standard, that's when you discipline because they're learning to keep the standard. They're learning to be obedient. This is very important. Even Yeshua as a child had to learn obedience. The scripture tells us in Hebrews that he learned obedience from what he suffered. We know that when he went off and stayed with the religious leaders in Jerusalem during Passover, his parents came and got him and says he submitted to them. He was obedient to them when they came to get him. And so it's important that we realize that no matter who the child is, even the King of Kings, when he was a child, he had to learn obedience. And you learn that from discipline. Other people, like I said, do like things other than the hand, but you got to make sure it's something that will not do any damage to a child. You should never break their skin. You should never bruise them or leave a mark. If those things are happening, you're going too far. It's abuse now. It's the point of physical discipline is to hurt, but not to harm. I need it to hurt because I need you to connect your action to pain. I need there to be a neural pathway in your brain that connects that action to pain, so that for the rest of your life, you will know that that action can cause pain. Even as an adult, you need to remember that the stove is hot. So it's not to just put your hand on the stove without checking to see if it's warm first. Like these are things that have to be in there. You're trying to put it in their brain so that as they grow, they make wise choices. And this is very important to understand that. But now we got to talk about consistency. We got to talk about consistency. Discipline completely loses its effect if you're inconsistent with it. If you're tired, if you're distracted, if you're annoyed, and they do this thing 4 or 5 times, and then on the 6th time that they do it, then you discipline them, the child's completely confused. And so when they're that little, I'm talking toddlers, and there's a reason I'm talking about toddlers this long. I'll tell you in a minute. When they are that little, in that toddler stage, you are on them all day long. And that's why I suggest that you stay home with your kids when they're that age. And nobody else is raising them, that you don't have them in a daycare, because you got to be with them all day long, making sure they understand your standard and making sure that they are being disciplined and rewarded for keeping or breaking that standard. Rewards are very important. And you don't reward them just to do what they're supposed to do, but you do reward them for good jobs, above and beyond. You clean up your toys and you put your sister's toys away. What? Now you reward them. You want to be a parent who gives rewards. You want to be a parent who lets them know when they do good. This is very, very important. But you got to address when they do wrong. And when they're toddlers, address it immediately. Immediately address it when they do wrong, because you're trying to create the connection in their brain. You are training their brain in a way that they cannot articulate yet. So it's very important that you do it. So I'm telling you, toddlers, when you do that as toddlers, they are learning discipline, self-discipline, but also learning respect. They're learning to respect what you say. Now, this means not only do you have to tell them what the standard is and then enforce the standard and reward the fact that they keep the standard. Not only do you have to do that, but you also have to do everything you tell them you're going to do. Meaning, don't tell them after school, if they're good, you're going to get ice cream. If you're not going to take them to get ice cream. I don't care what you have to do. If you told them that and they were good at school, you need to get them some ice cream because you said it. Now you're being held to the standard, because remember, you're in covenant relationship. You're teaching them integrity. You're teaching them the way God works. When God gives us promises, he does what he says he's going to do. If we don't, we teach them that God is like that, and he's not like that. and they won't have faith in God for the rest of their lives because we taught them that God was inconsistent. And he's not. He's very consistent. If we told them we were going to provide for them, we're going to buy them something for school, and then we don't do it, we have to apologize. We got to make that thing up. Even if you have to take off work to take it to school, you got to do it because you got to teach them the consistency that comes from the person who is in authority over them, particularly, again, representing God. This is very important because kids remember everything. They'll be adults, and they'll tell you, remember that time in 5th grade when you said you can bring brownies for my class and you didn't? I was so embarrassed. And you're like, you remember that? Oh my God. Yes, they remember. They will remember it because it disappointed them, but it taught them something that they shouldn't have learned, which is that the people in authority over them are liars. You don't want people to think that God is a liar because they will then be attributing characteristics of Satan to God. You never want your kids to do that. You want your kids to know that he is not only a truth teller, but he is the truth. And so that means you got to be a person of integrity. You got to do what you say you're going to do. And this is true about blessing them, but it's also true about discipline. If you say, if you touch them, I'm going to pop your hand, and they touch it and you don't pop them, they learn not to respect you. And this is I never throw out idle threats. Before I tell a child I'm going to discipline them for a certain action, if they do it, I think about, am I actually going to do it? If you're not going to do it, don't threaten. Don't even say anything if you're not going to discipline them after it. What you say you're going to do it, whether it's positive or negative. Whatever you say you're going to do, make sure you do it as a parent. This is very, very, very important. So now let's go to Exodus chapter 20. You guys are familiar with the 10 Commandments. And of course, you know this commandment here, which says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. You are in covenant with your child, and you want them to be blessed. You want to position them to be blessed. How do you position your child to be blessed? By teaching them the ways of the Lord. You can't teach a child to honor you if you are dishonorable. You've got to be the type of person that they learn to respect. One, because you say what you're going to do, you do what you say, and two, and then three, you've been consistent in your standard. They have watched you confess things and then do them. Meaning not just doing actions you said you would do, but saying that this is your moral standard, and then you actually keep that moral standard. People often tell kids, do as I say and not as I do, but it actually doesn't make sense to the human brain. Humans learn by not just hearing, but also by watching. Especially children, they will always model themselves after us, even when they don't want to. They will still do the things that we do. So we've got to make sure that we're putting a godly example in front of them. And when we do what we say we're going to do, they will learn to be those type of people, and they will learn that God is that person, and they will honor us, which will position them to be blessed. When we don't do what we say we're going to do, when we are a consistent person, when we're really a hypocrite, when we lie to them, because there's no nice way to say that, it still is a lie. When we say we're going to do something and we do not do it, it's a lie, and they know it, and they remember it. When we behave in that way, they have a hard time respecting us. And when they don't respect us, it's hard to honor us. And when they don't honor us, they get cursed, not us. And this is very important that we get that. We can cause our children to miss their blessings because we don't teach them to honor us, because we haven't been honorable, one, or two, because we have not disciplined them. If we make ourselves their peers in their eyes, if we negotiate with them about everything, if we allow them to be involved in all levels of decision making, then they're not going to honor us because we've not established ourselves as authorities in their lives. And if they don't honor us, they will lose their blessing. And the truth is, that'll be our fault. That'll be our fault that they lost the blessing because we didn't teach them to honor us. Now, let's go to Ephesians Chapter 6, which is also addressing the same issue. It's a similar issue, where it starts first with the children, but then it's going to go down to the parents. And in verses 1 through 3, it says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And then it quotes the scripture we just read. Honor your father and mother. It's quoting Exodus chapter 20, verse 12 from the 10 Commandments, which is the first commandment with a promise. See, the other commandments didn't promise anything if you do them. This one has a promise attached to it, so that it may go well with you, that you may enjoy long life on the earth. And so it's important that we realize that we want our kids to be blessed. We want them to receive the blessings of God. And the first relationship where they get in position to do that is their covenant relationship with us. So Paul continues on in verse 4, and it says, fathers, which also means parents. Please know that it's a masculine term, which connotes everybody in that role, which is mothers and fathers. Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So though there is not a curse attached with parents not honoring their children, you want to make sure that you are not pushing your children. Remember, we're training them up in the way that they should go. You know who your kids are. So you want to be to them the parent that they need you to be. They don't need someone mocking them. They don't need somebody antagonizing them. They certainly don't need somebody picking on them. I have seen parents bully their kids just because they could and nobody put them in check. And this is why the world has gone so crazy and has allowed kids to be emancipated from their parents, because parents have abused their authority. And so as godly parents, we certainly can never do that. We've got to keep ourselves in line. We got to make sure we're operating in the fruit of the Spirit when we raise our children, so that we operate in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. We got to have that self-control. And we can have joy at all times. Like even after disciplining our children, we discipline them. And then they come back because we taught them to be respectful and to be honoring. And they apologize. Everything is back to normal. There's joy, there's love, there's restoration. You don't hold records of wrong against your kids. 1 Corinthians 13 tells us that love holds no records of wrong. We got to be mature in the way we love our children. They might still be mad at us for disciplining them, but they're going to learn mature love because we love maturely. Now, before I let you guys go, I do want to talk to you guys about these other developmental levels, because I'll talk to you specifically about little children. We're talking about toddlers, preschoolers, even like kindergarten age, right in that same area, like 1.5 to 5, from the time they walk to the time they finish kindergarten. You want to do all that stuff I was just saying. Be consistent. Tell them what you're going to do. Give them clear standards. Discipline them immediately if they don't meet the standards. But don't be very harsh with them, because the whole point is that they will associate pain with wrong choices, pain with unhealthy and unholy decisions. You want them to associate pain with that. Now you're getting a little bit older. So now they're 6 years old, they're in first grade, right? So you got, first grade to fifth grade. Now this is important because you're dealing with like six years old to 10 years old. They're not, teens yet, and they're actually not even really pre-teens yet, but they are certainly more cognitively aware than they were at that preschool and kindergarten age, okay? So now you may still continue the physical discipline, but you want to start phasing it out in this stage from the 6-year-old to 10-year-old stage. That's when you start phasing the discipline out, meaning it should be a rarity that they have to get physical discipline. So when I was at that age, it wouldn't get popped anymore. Now I was getting whippings. And so, from 6 to 10, but it was very rare. I wasn't getting whippings every day, because I had learned the standards of my household in that preschool age. The same thing with my own kids. They learned it in preschool. When you, the elementary school is saved for especially disobedient circumstances, especially disobedient times where they have really just gone against you and done something that just really should not be done. Otherwise, now you do have other means by which you can discipline them, because in this developmental stage, there are things that they care about. As a little child, their attention span is really small. And so the other type of discipline with the timeouts and with the, taking a toy away, stuff like that, they're too little to really make the connection between the bad behavior and what you just did as a consequence. That's why the pain, the physical discipline are telling you, no, then they do it anyway, pop them, you move on, because now they relate pain to the wrong decision. 6 to 10, they actually can have conversations with you. They're clear-minded, they understand all types of stuff, and there's things they care about. So now what you want to do is the discipline wants to focus more on removing things they care about, particularly things that were distractions that cause them to do wrong behavior, rather than the physical behavior, the physical discipline. So you want to start phasing out the physical discipline, because they are at a place where they can understand other forms of discipline now. Their brain actually can make the connection If I don't do my homework and I play the video game, mom's going to take my video game away. Their brain can make that leap. Their brain can make that connection. When they were little, if I take my sister's teddy bear, mom is going to take my teddy bear. That means nothing to a toddler. The toddler just got confused. But a 6 to 10-year-old, it does mean something because they care about the game because they was on the game and you took the game away. And now they don't have the game because they didn't do the homework. But even that type of discipline, you need to set from the beginning how long it will be. I'm taking your game away for this amount of time. And during that time, you better make sure you do your homework the whole time. Then you will get the game back. And it's got to be short periods of time. I'm talking about a week, not a month, because by then they have forgotten about the game. They have moved on. Somebody probably bought them something else now. Just replace the game. The discipline has lost its power. Short periods of time, even a few days, even a day or two, especially if something that's particularly fond of. But don't take away things that are necessary for life. Don't take away meals. Meals are important. You take away dessert, but not the meal itself. Don't take away things that are necessary for life, because remember, you're trying to still build that security. You want them to always feel secure. Even if they're disciplined, you want them to feel secure. When God disciplines us, he doesn't take the breath of life away from us. He doesn't stop providing for us when he disciplines us. He might make things a little bit tight on us, but he's not going to stop being our provider. He's not going to stop being our father. So we don't want to take away the things that make their lives secure as discipline. That's not what you want to take away. You want to take away the excesses. You want to take away the things that they enjoy. Don't take away the things that make their lives secure. They need food, clothing, and shelter. Don't take those things away. Those are necessities. I also want to encourage you not to publicly embarrass your child if you can avoid it. There are times when your child will act up in public, and you may have to address them in public because of the scene that they have caused. But for the most part, if you can avoid publicly embarrassing them from 6 to 10, see, when they're 2, if they fall out in the middle of the living room, you got guests, and they're 2, you pop them right there in front of the guests. Because you need to do it immediately. You need them to know that you're not going to not discipline them because other people are around. Otherwise, they'll only act up when other people are around, so they think you won't discipline. Very important. My kids tried it. I had to discipline them in front of people so they would know that I would do it. And if you have a problem with that, you pick them up, take them to the bathroom, then you discipline them in the bathroom. But it's got to get immediate, right then in that scenario. Okay? I used to take the grocery store bathroom or the church bathroom, pop them up, bring them back out after they start crying. But a 6 to 10-year-old, they're developing self-esteem. They're developing their own identity. And so you do not want to publicly embarrass them if you can avoid it. It's not something you want in their mindset that they were publicly embarrassed, because the discipline is now gone. It's not about that they got discipline. Now the embarrassment is what they have to deal with. You don't want them to live life in shame. So discipline, again, is an act of love. So if you can, you want to discipline them in private. You still want to do it pretty quickly, pretty immediately. But you may have to say, when you get home, see, from 6 to 10, they can handle it when you get home. Those little kids, 1.5 to 5, you can't be when you get home. That's too long. But a 6 to 10-year-old will remember, in that car ride, they'll be sweating bullets. But it's appropriate for their age, is my point. It's appropriate for their age. And again, you don't have to do the physical discipline, which is the whippings, unless they really do something outlandish, like they fail English. You know what I mean? And even then, you still might be able to do something else. Might be to be creative and do something else. But you got to know that child to make sure that what you're going to do is effective to change the behavior. That's the point, is to change the behavior so that they go back into healthy, holy behavior, as opposed to doing the things that are unhealthy and unholy. Now, when you get into the teen years, the preteen and the teen years, so now we've got, 11 years old and 6th grade and middle school. It's a whole nother ballgame. They're expected to be a little bit more independent in school. And they got the hormones and stuff is happening. The bodies are changing. A lot of girls menstruate at around that age at 11. So you got, breasts are growing. Sometimes even facial hair start to go on young men at like maybe 13. So you got voices deepening, all type of stuff is happening. Body hair is growing. They're becoming adults, but don't have the adult mind and maturity yet. You want to start to shift the way you interact with them again, particularly with discipline. You want to treat them as older people, meaning you want to talk to them in an older way. You don't want to talk to them like you talk to them in elementary school. You want to have more adult conversation with them, not adult, you're not adult yet, but you want to change the level of your conversations. You want to change the level of your training. You want to make sure that you've talked to them about things that are happening in that age level, sexuality and identity and things like that. You want to have those conversations. You want to make sure that they are developing their own personal relationship with God. So it may have been dependent upon you in those previous years, but now it's really got to be independent. And like even at 10 and 8 and 9, they can start developing their independent relationship with God. But especially in these years, when we're talking about middle school, like 11 to 13, you want to make sure that they are developing that independent relationship with God, the independent view of themselves, not just based off of what you say about them, but they do value themselves and love themselves. Like you want to make sure that this type of stuff is developing because they are having experiences apart from you that sometimes you will never know about. And they're dealing with stuff that sometimes they will never tell you. You want to keep that communication open with your kids so they can talk to you about the challenges that they're going through. And you want to stop associating discipline so much with their choices as to help them to make the right choice for themselves. Every now and then you may still have to incur discipline. 11 to 13 is still pretty young, but you want to more so influence them to make good decisions, give them the information that they need, show them that you trust them. So this is the age where you want to really start trusting them to make decisions because you want them to mess up at this age. You want them to mess up at 11 to 13, so they're not messing up at 14 to 17. You see what I mean? Let them make some minor choices on their own. Let them handle some stuff. Let them get it wrong a little bit. You correct them, you help them, you get them back on their feet. You want to really be training them for adulthood at this time, which means you're going to give them more responsibilities. You're going to give them more trust. You are going to discipline them. But again, now you're thinking about that discipline and what effect it's going to have on their lives. And you're trying to help them to be good people. Because it's very, very important that you make that shift when they make the shift. That you shift with your child. You're not so treating them like elementary school kids, because this is when they get rid of toys. This is when they want to dress like attractively to the opposite sex. This is what's happening in that time. So you want to shift the way you interact with them, so that as a parent you're growing with your child. Parents should always grow with their children. If not, your training and your discipline will lose effect completely because you're treating them based off of a previous developmental level, and you never want to do that because again it loses its effect completely. So make sure you're on the level that they're on. You're growing with them and you're talking to God, watching and praying. You're watching the level they're going to. You're watching the changes happening in their mind and body, all of that. And you're praying, God, show me how to deal with this. Again, you want to develop the security. You want to develop the trust. You want to realize that at this age, their peer group is going to become more important than you. You were everything. When they were a toddler, you were still very important when they were in elementary school. But now their peers are going to be the most important. So you want to make sure that you're teaching them to pick good friends. You want to make sure that all the scriptures about friends, read Proverbs Chapters 1 and 2. All that is about the people that you're in. You want to let them know how much friendships can influence them. And you want to help them to pick good friends. You want to know their friends. You want to know who their friends are. Let them come to the house. Let them hang out at your house because now you're getting to know their friends. You're not questioning them. You're not interrogating them. But you're being a part of your kid's life. Make your house the house that's safe for them and their friends. You will learn what you need to know about how to continue to train up your child as you're watching their peer interactions. See, this is so important. All of this needs to happen as you are shifting as a parent and they are shifting as a young person. Now you move up into the high school years where physical discipline should be completely over now, unless they're in your face, like, acting up. You might have to slap them. That's the real thing. You really might have to do that just to remind them that they are a child. Because they get a little bit big in their britches sometimes at that age. We live in 14, 17. Every now and then they think they're the adult, and you might have to take them down a peg just for a second. But most of the time that shouldn't happen because now they might be taller than you. But you instilled in them that fear of God, because when they honor their parents, they're developing a fear of God. Those two things go together. People who dishonor their parents don't fear God. But even if they get huge, my son's 6 feet tall. He's probably 6 something now. And I'm telling you, just this morning, he was playing about not going to school, and I made a face, and he ran away. I don't care how big that boy is, he knows. But that's been instilled since he was little. So he's gonna be way bigger than me. But because it was instilled in him to honor me at a little age, and I disciplined him consistently, when he was little, even big as he is, he's strong, he's a boxer. I don't care nothing about that. You better do what I said. And he knows it. That fear of God is still in him, which causes him to honor and respect me, little teeny old me. That's an important thing, because they will then respect authority figures, employers, principals, teachers. They will respect authority in their lives, and they will fear God. So again, starting when they're little, but you want to reinforce it when they become teens. But again, give them more trust, give them more responsibility, be involved in their lives, support the things they do. I cannot stress that enough. We do that in elementary school with all their little games, all their little plays. When they get to high school, we stop doing it, because either dealing with something else, or we got smaller kids and now we're more focused on. Don't stop doing it when they get to high school. Take them to places they need to go. Make sure they're developing the skills for life that they're going to need. Answer their questions. Be there for them. Keep them on the right path. Discipline them when you need to. You gotta take something away. You gotta put them on restriction. Do what you gotta do, because you still have to train them. But don't go overboard. Remember Ephesians Chapter 6, don't exasperate your children, because now they do have their own minds. They, like, for real, and they have their own tempers. You don't want to get into these matches with your kids. I've seen people do it, where they get into these yelling matches with their teenagers. I've seen people get into yelling matches with toddlers, which is just insane. Like, discipline the child and move on. Honestly, it stresses everybody out when you're going back and forth with all the words and all the yelling. Never do that with a toddler. It doesn't help, because they don't have the cognitive reason ability to even deal with it. They just operating out of emotion, and you're getting sucked into emotion. You're doing the same thing. Discipline them and move on, and then love on them again after the discipline is over. But with teens, again, you don't want to do that either. You don't want to do the back and forth arguing. You want to listen. You want to keep your emotions in check. And if you see that they are not doing it, they're not listening, they're not keeping their emotions in check, you address it. You may have to back up till you cool off a little bit, come back and talk again. But you want to make sure that you are creating a communication that's going to be necessary, because they're going to be traversing some journeys in their life that is just challenging in their age. Lots of challenging stuff happens at that age, and they make decisions that affect them for the rest of their lives at that age. So you want to make sure that you're there for them, and that you're treating them more maturely than you treat them even middle school. Now you know they've grown some more. So you're having deep conversations with them. You're trusting them with things. You're giving them responsibilities. You're giving them some space. You're not all over them and trying to make all decisions for them. You want to see what decisions they're going to make. You want to support those decisions. This is important, because again, that very next stage, they're 18 years old, they're 21 years old. Now they are legally adults, even though they're still your child. Now, please understand this, biblically speaking, you're still always responsible for that child. Now, they're responsible for their own sin. We know that. They are definitely responsible for their own sin. That happens during that middle school age, where the children are then become responsible for their own sin. However, they still need you. They still need your guidance. Even adult kids need your guidance. Always make sure that security I've been talking about building, they always feel safe and secure with you, that your home is safe and secure. Conversation with you, safe and secure. Your love is secure. It's never going anywhere. No matter what they do, no matter what happens, you want to always be home base for them. Because when that happens, they learn that God will never leave them nor forsake them. But if you are willing to cut them off, if you're willing to have nothing to do with them, those type of things, we can literally give our kids over to the devil by doing that. You don't want to do that. You want to allow them to always be safe and secure, and you be honest with them. Address the stuff that needs to be addressed. Absolutely do that. But you want to make sure that they can always come to you when they need help, when they need support, that they're not out trying to do things on their own and fall into some of the enemy's traps. Which is why, next week we're going to look at finances. This is why you want to be at a financial position where you can actually be support for your kids, and you even give them a leg up. You can help them with that first, down payment on the car, or the first down payment on a house. You can co-sign for them in that first apartment where the people say, hey, you don't have any credit. Somebody's got to sign up here because we don't trust you. Like, you want to be that person that they can come to. But you got to have your house in order to be able to do that for them. And that shows them that God will provide for them. When you're able to support them and you do it without judgment, without asking anything back, not the way the world does it. See, the world always wants something back. The world always wants something in exchange, and they learn very bad things having to depend on the world as they're growing 18, 20, 21, 25, 31. They learn the wrong things when they need help and they can't go to family, particularly parents, and they got to go to the world because the world is going to charge them for it. And it can happen in lots of different ways, spiritually, financially, emotionally, but it's a cost. But it shouldn't be that way with family, with parents. You always want to continue to provide that stability and that security for them. You want to continue to be there for them. You don't want to kick them out at 18 and say, go for what you know. You want to move across the country, move across the planet, because now you're going to retire and do that stuff you always wanted to do. They still need you. And you want to be mindful of that. If they want to move, that's fine. But then you're still home base. You're still a place of security for them for quite some time. Let them get to a place where their careers are established, their relationships are established, they're healthy, and then you can start doing some of that other stuff you want to do. After you've empty nested and your kids are now secure, they finished their educations, they've done some things that provide some security for themselves. Now they're building their own households. Now you can move over here, move over there, go to Alaska, Hawaii. I'm talking about moving there if you want to. It's fine. Because now they just need your emotional support, and if you need to wire them some money, you can do it. But before then, they may need to come home. They may run into some challenges in the world, some things you thought you taught them to do, they didn't really know how to do. And now they got to come back, and they need a little bit more training. We got to be prepared for that. We got to be there for that. They could get sick. I'm telling you, I don't care how old your kids get, if they get sick before they have their own households, like if they're in college or they're in their first job, and they get sick, they want you. They want to come home because you provided that security and that stability, and they know that you're going to take care of them. And so I want to encourage you to really, really let God minister to you about this, because again, that relationship between parent and child is a covenant relationship. It never goes away. That covenant never goes away. And the only time that your relationship will change is when you're in heaven with the Lord, where they will be your spiritual brother and sister. And so you want to remember that one day they'll be your spiritual brother and sister. But as long as they're on this earth, they're still your child. They can be 80 years old and you can be 100, but they'll still be your child. You want to remember that. Now, the last thing I want to share with you before I go is I want to talk to you about the covenant between the husband and the wife. So I told you, we talked about in Malachi Chapter 2, we talked specifically about the husband and the wife being in covenant so that godly offspring can come from it. We talked about that. However, what happens when the husband and the wife are no longer in covenant? This is what you want to do, because that does happen. Divorce happens. One may have broken the covenant, the other one decides to get divorced. One may break the covenant and decide to get divorced. Lots of different things can happen. Now, in that case, when that has happened, or maybe you got a divorce, but you realize you didn't understand how important covenant was to God when you got the divorce. And now you're divorced. It is what it is. Either way, no matter how it has happened, your marriage covenant with that person is over. But you should now create a whole new covenant, which is a parenting covenant. You want to create a parenting covenant with your ex. If y'all have children together, a child or children together, you want to now create a parenting covenant, because children still need to be reared within a covenant. So y'all have to have a covenant. Y'all have to have a parenting covenant. And that's going to be an agreement on the standards by which you will raise the children or child, an agreement on how you will speak about each other in the child's presence, an agreement about not putting the child in the midst of your challenges and your issues, because kids do not deserve to be there. I'm talking even adults. If they are adults, they still don't need to be there. It's between the two of you. That parenting covenant, to continue to raise them, to continue to agree on how you rear them, to continue to come into agreement about supporting them, even if you never want to see each other again. You may have to go to this play and they go to that game, and you go to this event and they go to that event. That's still a parenting covenant. You're now agreeing on which events each one's going to go to so that the child is supported, but you don't have to interact with each other. The point is, you got to have a parenting covenant, because y'all are still in blood covenant with the same one child or multiple children. You're still in blood covenant with them, which means your relationship is not completely ended in God's sight. Now the covenant has to shift. Because you've gotten a divorce, you dissolved the marriage covenant, you now have to have a parenting covenant. And it's essential, I don't care how you feel about that person, it's essential for that child's growth and development It's essential for them to have a healthy life, a healthy self-image, and to live as a holy person. Because here's the point. Any negativity that they associate with their other parent is also going to be associated with their own identity. So anything you say bad about that person, anytime y'all are arguing and having issues, all of that is going to negatively affect how they view themselves. So you have to make sure that you then are in a relationship with that person in such a way that you can positively address the needs and issues of your child or children, and you can be in agreement on it. Even if your agreement is we're never going to be in the same room at the same time, that's still an agreement. You got to be in agreement. So the communication does not end. A lot of times, people think they're going to divorce their spouse with whom they have children and just get rid of them. You're never going to see them again. The only way that is possible that can happen is one, that they die, which you're not in control of, or two, that you completely remove them from that child's life, which is not good for the child. Might be good for you, not good for the child. And the truth of the matter is, you can never extract that DNA from that child and give it back to the other person. They contributed to that child in a blood covenant, just like you did. And it's important for that child's self-image and healthy development that they continue to have some form of relationship, some form of healthy relationship with that other person. Now, if that other person is unhealthy, like they're abusive, they're drug addiction, something like that, you got to pray to God for how to deal with it, but you still got to form within your child a healthy self-image based off of their relationship with that person. Like if they're in prison, like you still have to deal with that. You still have to deal with it. Don't just cut off, because that child still needs that role fulfilled that's in contact with that person, and the person didn't die. They're still alive. So now you're praying with the child for the person. You see what I'm saying? You're seeking God for how you should interact, and you're letting God heal your heart so you can actually hear his instructions about what role that person should play in the child's life. God has to tell you, should you take the child to visit the person? He may say no, he may say yes. He may say no at a certain age, and say yes at another age. Like this is right answer. You got to ask the Lord, can I trust them with my child when I know that they had a previous addiction? How much should I trust them? Look, how should these interactions happen? God has to tell you. You got to let God talk to you. It can't be emotional decisions. God has to deal with it, because you are trying to keep your child safe and healthy, but you also want to make sure that other parent, that you are not in the way of that blood covenant that they have with the child. You don't want to get in the way. You want to be a useful tool in God's hands concerning the relationship that the other parent has with their child. Very, very important. Don't get in God's way. Ask God what you ought to do. So this is important. Everything I said is essential. And the last part that I just shared with you about having to have a parenting covenant with your ex, because y'all have a child together, please know that these are things that you will not have to deal with if you lay a good foundation at the beginning. If you pick the partner that God is guiding you to, with whom you are compatible, and your families come together. If you if you court each other, you choose to get married after you sought God, and you submit to your vows, you keep your vows, both of you, and you allow God to teach you how to communicate, and your sexual relationship is healthy, and you agree on how you're going to rear your children. And so when we do those things that way, we bring children into a healthy family environment where God is already present. And I'm telling you, it gives them a head start in life. They're even physically healthier than we do. They're more resilient emotionally. Their minds are clearer. They're less likely to have mental illness. I'm telling you, all of this is absolutely true. But when we don't establish those foundations right, oftentimes we see the fruit of that in our children. You will see if you got a relationship that's unhealthy from the beginning. You're going to see the fruit of that in your kid, because they're a product of that unhealthy relationship. It'll manifest in their soul. It'll manifest sometimes in their physical health and their stress levels, all of that. You'll see it if you were inconsistent, like you used to party all the time, and be all out in the world when the child was born, when they were young. They remember that stuff. Then you decide that you're going to turn your life over to the Lord, and they remember the way you first lived, and they may be used to that. You come out of it. That's what they were used to. So now you got to pray for their deliverance, for their healing, for their transformation, because you haven't been consistent. And it's a good thing you shifted, but the fact that you've now been inconsistent, there's been a shift in your life. They went from worldliness to holiness. You got to address that in your child's soul. You got to address that in their thinking. Remember, those neural pathways were set for worldliness. Now you've got to ask God to heal their mind, heal their soul. The mind's a part of the soul, so they have new neural pathways for holiness. Just as He is transforming you and making you a new creation, you got to pray He does the same thing for them, because they will remember the wild life that y'all used to live. Even when they was home alone, you was out partying, they remember all that. Now all of a sudden you try to be a parent, and they're like, "Wait a minute, stop! I needed you when I was 5. I'm good now. I got this." That's not true, but that's what they think. Now you got to pray that God does all types of healing and transformation, which He is capable of doing. But you got to recognize it. Don't pretend like there have not been flaws in your marriage or your relationship, which produced the children or child, and in your parenting in the past. Address them head on with God first, so that you can get rid of the condemnation and guilt, and also take responsibility with your child. You got to deal with those things. Don't leave them. Don't try to sweep them under the rug, put them in the closet, or ignore the big old pink elephant in the room. Have the conversations, repent to your child, because that is a covenant relationship. If you messed up as a parent early on in their life, repent to them. But also commit to them that you're not going back to them, that you're going to go forward in the right way. And they might not believe you at first, but they will see your fruit. Children will watch what you do. And after a while, it may take a year or two, they'll start to come in alignment with the transformation that you're making because you have sought the Lord. And so I wanted to address all different types of scenarios with regard to parents in this particular video, and I pray that I did do that. And so I want to encourage you to really, the most important thing you can do is go before God first, talk to Him, and then let Him guide you as you raise your children. Be blessed, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week, where we're going to look at on marriage and finance.